Part 5. Money, the medium of exchange and measure of value. Chapter 1. Confusions as to money. There is no social idea or instrument with which civilized men are more generally and personally familiar than money. From early infancy to the latest age, we all use it in thought, speech, and daily transactions without encountering practical difficulty in distinguishing what is money from what is not. Yet, as to what it really is and what it really does, there are both in common thought on economic subjects and in the writings of professed economists the widest divergences. The latest American Cyclopedia, Johnson's 1896, gives this definition. Money is that kind of currency which has an intrinsic value, and which thus, if not used as currency, would still be wealth. Thus, there are some who say that money really consists of the precious metals, and whatever may be locally, temporarily, or partially used as money can be so used only as a representative of these metals. They hold that the paper money, which now constitutes so large a part of the currency of the civilized world, derives its value from the promise, expressed or implied, to redeem it in one or another of these metals, and by way of assuring such redemption, vast quantities of these precious metals are kept widely in store by governments and banks. On the other hand, there are those who say that what makes a thing money is the edict or fiat of government that it shall be treated and received as money. And again, there are others still who contend that whatever can be used in exchange for the avoidance of barter is money, thus including in the meaning of the term notes, checks, drafts, etc., issued by private parties as fully as the coins or notes issued by governments or banks. Much of the contradiction and confusion that exists in popular thought proceeds from the pressure of personal interests brought into the question by the relation of debtor and creditor. But the confusions which prevail among professed economists have a deeper source. They evidently result from the confusions which prevail in economic thought and teaching as to the nature of wealth and the cause of value. Money is the common measure of value, the common representative and exchanger of wealth. Unless we have clear ideas of the meaning of value and the nature of wealth, it is manifest, therefore, that we cannot form clear ideas as to the nature and functions of money. But since we have cleared up in the preceding chapters the meaning of the terms value and wealth, we are now in a position to proceed with an inquiry into the nature, function, and laws of money. It is unnecessary to waste time with any attempt to disentangle the maze of contradictory statements of fact and confusions of opinion with which the current literature of the subject is embarrassed. The true course of all economic investigation is to observe and trace the relation of those social phenomena that are obvious now to us, for economic laws must be as invariable as physical laws, as the chemist or astronomer can safely proceed only from relations which he sees do here and now exist to infer what has existed or will exist. So it is with the political economist. Yet we find, if we consider them, that these divergences in the definition of money spring rather from differences of opinion as to what ought to be considered and treated as money, than from differences as to what, as a matter of fact, money actually is. The men who differ most widely in defining money find no difficulty in agreeing as to what is meant by money in daily transactions. Since we cannot find a consensus of opinion among economists, our best plan is to seek it among ordinary people. To see what is usually meant by money, we have only to know the essential characteristics of that which we all agree in treating as money in our practical affairs. Chapter 2. The common understanding of money. When we are confused as to the true meaning of an economic term, our best plan is to endeavor to obtain a consensus of opinion as to what the thing really is, what function it really performs. After we have seen what money really is, and what functions it performs, we shall then be in a position to determine what the best forms of money are. If I have agreed to pay money to another, the common understanding of what money is will not hold my agreement fulfilled if I offer him wood, or bricks, or services, or gold or silver bullion, even though, as closely as can be estimated, these may be of equal value to the money promised. My creditor might take such things in lieu of what I had agreed to pay, but he would be more likely to object, and his objection, fully expressed, would amount to this: what you agreed to pay me was money. With money, I can buy anything that anyone has to sell and pay any debt I owe. But what you offer me is not money. It is something I would be willing to take if I happen to have any personal use for it. But I have no personal use for it, and to get anyone to give me what I may want for it, I must find someone who wants this particular thing and make a trade with him. What you propose would therefore put on me trouble, risk, and loss, not contemplated in our agreement. And the justice of this objection would be recognized by all fair men. In this, in the ease with which it may be passed from hand to hand in canceling obligations or transferring ownership, lies the peculiar characteristic of money. It is not the intrinsic nature of the thing, but the use to which it is applied that gives its essential character to money, and constitutes the distinction between it and other things. Even children recognize this. If I make friends with a little one of 4 or 5, and, showing a stick of candy, ask, "What is this for?" it will say, "That is to eat." If I show a hat or a pair of shoes, it will say, "That is to wear." But if I show a piece of money, it will say, "That is to buy things with." Now, in this, the little child will give the definition of money that, whatever may be our monetary theories, we all practically recognize. The peculiar use of money, what money is for, is that of buying other things. What, by virtue of this use, money may or may not have the capability for any other use? That is not material. For as long as a thing is reserved for the use of buying things, any use inconsistent with this use is excluded. We might, for instance, put sticks of candy to the use of buying things, but the moment a stick of candy was applied to the use of being eaten, its use in buying things would end. So, if a greenback be used to light a cigar, its use as money is destroyed. Even where coins are used as ornaments, their use as money is prevented during that time. In short, the use of money, no matter what it is composed of, is not directly to satisfy desire, but indirectly to satisfy desire through exchange for other things. We do not eat money, nor drink money, nor wear money. We buy other things with it. We esteem money and seek it, not for itself, but for what we may obtain by parting with it. This is true even where money is hoarded, for the gratification which hoarding gives is the consciousness of holding at command that with which we may readily buy anything we may wish to have. The little child, I have supposed, would probably not know the meaning of the word exchange, which is that of the voluntary transfer of desired things for desired things, but it would know the thing, having become familiar with it, in the little exchanges that go on between children, in the giving of marbles for candy or toys, or in transactions based on, "I will do this for you, if you will do that for me." But such exchanges would probably be spoken of as trades or swaps, reserving the words buying or selling for exchanges in which money is used. In this use of words, the child would conform to a practice that has become common among careful writers. Both in ordinary usage and in political economy, we generally confine the words buying and selling to exchanges in which money is given or promised, speaking of an exchange in which money is not involved as a barter or trade, or simply an exchange. It is where money is one of the things exchanged that the transaction is called a purchase and a sale. In this usage, we habitually treat money as though it were the more notable or more important side of exchanges in which things, not money, are given for money, that side of exchange from which or towards which the initiative impulse proceeds. And there is another usage which points in the same direction. Among the masses of our people, at least, good manners are held to require that where money passes in a transaction of exchange, the receiver of the money should, by some such phrase as "thank you," indicate a sense of benefit or obligation. The reason for both these usages is, I think, to be found in the fact that money is the thing in which gain or profit is usually estimated, the thing which can usually be most readily and certainly exchanged for any other thing. It is this that makes it seem to those who do not look closely that what is sought in exchange is money, and that he who gets money in return for other things is in a better position than he who gets other things in return for money. To see in what money really differs from other things having exchangeable or purchasing power, let us imagine a number of men to undertake a journey through a country where they have no personal acquaintance. Let them, for instance, start from New York in pleasant weather to make a leisurely trip by the high road for 200 miles. Let them, for the defrayal of the expenses of the journey, provide themselves with exchangeable things of different kinds. Imagine one to have a valuable horse, another some staple commodity, such as tobacco or tea, another gold and silver bullion, another a check or bill of exchange, or a checkbook, and the fifth to have current money. These things might have value to the same amount, but at the first stop for rest and refreshment, a great difference between them as to readiness of convertibility would be seen. The only way the man with the horse could pay for the slightest entertainment for man or beast, without selling his horse for money or bartering for things that might be very inconvenient to carry, would be by trading him for a less valuable horse. It is clear that he could not go far in this way, for, to say nothing of the delays incident to horse trades, he would, if he persisted in them under pressure of his desire to go on, soon find himself reduced to an animal that could hardly carry itself. Though of staple commodities, tobacco and tea are probably those most readily divisible and easily carried, the tourist who tried to pay his way with them would find much difficulty. If not driven to sell his stock outright for what money he could get, he would virtually have to convert his pleasure excursion into a peddling trip, and to say nothing of the danger he would run of being arrested for infringement of federal or local license laws, would be put to much delay, loss, and annoyance in finding those willing to give the particular things he needed for the particular things he had. And while gold and silver are, of all commodities, those which have the most uniform and staple value, yet the man who had started with bullion would, after he had left the city, hardly find anyone who could tell their real value or was willing to take them in return for commodities or service. To exchange them at anything like a reasonable rate, he would have to hunt up some village jeweler who could test and weigh them, and who, though he might offer to give him a clockwork trinket or to repair his watch in exchange, would hardly have the commodities or service our traveler needed at his disposal. To get what he wanted for what he had to give without recourse to money, he would be driven to all sorts of intermediate exchanges. As for the man with the checkbook, or check or bill of exchange, he would find himself the worst of all. He could make no more use of them where he was not known than of so much blank paper, unless he found someone who could testify to his good credit, or who would go to the expense of telegraphing to learn it. To repeat this at every stopping place, as would be necessary if his trip were to be carried through as it had been begun, would be too much for the patience and endurance of an ordinary man. But the man with the money would find no difficulty from first to last. Everyone who had any commodity to exchange or service to render would take his money gladly, and probably say, "Thank you," on receiving it. He alone could make the journey he set out to make, without delay or annoyance or loss on the score of exchanges. What we may conclude from this little imaginative experiment is not that of all things, money is the most valuable thing. That, although many people have in a vague way accepted it, would involve a fallacy of the same kind that is involved in the assumption that a pound of lead is heavier than a pound of feathers. What we may safely conclude from our experiment is that of all exchangeable things, money is the most readily exchangeable, and indeed, that this ready exchangeability is the essential characteristic of money. Yet we have but to extend our illustration so as to imagine our travelers taking with them beyond this country that same money that they found so easily exchangeable here, to see that money is not one substance, nor in all times and places the same substance. What is money in the United States is not money in England. Although in places in each country much resorted to by travelers from another country, the money of the two countries may circulate together, as American money with English money in Bermuda, or Canadian money with American money at Niagara Falls. Yet the traveler who wishes to pass beyond such monetary borders with what will readily exchange for the things he may need must provide himself with the money of the country. The money that has served him in the country he has left becomes in the country using a different money, a mere commodity the moment he leaves the monetary border, which he will find it advantageous to exchange with some dealer in such commodities for money of the country. Is money, therefore, a matter of mere governmental regulation? That is to say, can governmental statute or fiat, as is today contended by many, prescribe what money shall be used and at what rate it shall pass? It is unnecessary for those of us who lived in or visited California between the years of 1862 and 1879 to look further than our own country, and time to see that it cannot. During those years, while the money of the rest of the Union was a more or less depreciated paper, the money of that state and of the Pacific Coast generally was gold and silver. The paper money of the central government was used for the purchase of postage stamps, the payment of internal revenue dues, the satisfaction of judgments of the federal courts, and of those of the state courts where there was no specific contract, and for remittances to the East. But between man, and in ordinary transactions, it passed only as a commodity. If it be said that governmental power was not fully exerted in this case, that the United States government dishonored its own currency in making bonds payable and custom house dues receivable only in gold, and that the California specific contract law virtually gave the recognition of the state courts only to gold and silver, it may turn to such examples as that of the Confederate currency, as that of the continental currency, as that afforded by colonial currencies prior to the Revolution, or as that of the French assignats. Government may largely affect the use of money, as it may largely affect the use of language. It may enact what money shall be paid out and received by government officials, or recognized in the courts, as it may prescribe in what language government documents shall be printed, or legislative or legal proceedings held, or scholars in the public schools be taught. But it can no more prescribe what shall be used as the common medium of exchange between man and man in transactions that depend on mutual consent than it can prescribe in what time mothers shall teach their babies to lisp. In all the many efforts that governments, limited or absolute, have made to do this, the power of government has singularly failed. Shall we say then, as do many who point out this impotency of mere government fiat, that the exchange value of any money depends ultimately upon its intrinsic value, that the real money in the world, the only true and natural money, is gold and silver? This notion is even more widely opposed to facts than is that of the fiatists. Gold and silver have, for the longest time and over the widest area, served, and yet do serve, as material for money, and sometimes have served, and in some places yet do serve, as money. This was the case to some extent in the early days of the California diggings, when every merchant or hotel keeper or gambler or bartender was provided with a bottle of acid and a pair of scales, and men paid for goods or food or lodging or drinks or losses out of buckskin bags in which they carried gold dust or nuggets. But gold and silver are not the money of the world. The traveler who should attempt to go round the world paying his expenses with gold and silver bullion would meet great difficulty. Nor would he obviate that difficulty by taking instead of bullion, gold, and silver coin. The truth is that there is no universal money and never yet has been, any more than there is or has been, in times of which we have knowledge, a universal language. As for intrinsic value, it is clear that our paper money, which has no intrinsic value, performs every office of money, is in every sense as truly money as our coins, which have intrinsic value, and that even of our coins, their circulating or money value has for the most part no more correlation to intrinsic value than it has in the case of our paper money. And this is the case today, all over the civilized world. The fact is that neither the fiat of government, nor the action of individuals, nor the character or intrinsic value of the material used, nor anything else, can make money or mar money, raise or lessen its circulating value, except as it affects the disposition to receive it as a medium of exchange. In different times and places, all sorts of things capable of more or less easy transfer have been used as money. Thus, in San Francisco in the early days, when the sudden outflow of gold from the mines brought a sudden demand for money which there was no ready means of supplying, bogus coins, known to be bogus, passed from hand to hand as money. In New York at the beginning of the Civil War, when there was a great scarcity of circulating medium, owing to the withdrawal of gold and silver from circulation, postage stamps, car tickets, bread tickets, and even counterfeit notes, known to be counterfeit, passed from hand to hand as money. Shall we say then that they are right who contend that a true definition of money must include everything that can be used in exchange to the avoidance of barter? Clearly, we cannot say this without ignoring a real and very important distinction, the distinction between money and credit. For a little consideration will show that the checks, drafts, negotiable notes, and other transferable orders and obligations which so largely economize the use of money in the commercial world today, do so only when accompanied by something else which money itself does not require. That something else is trust or credit. This is the essential element of all devices and instruments for dispensing with the mediumship of money without resort to barter. It is only by virtue of it that they can take the place of money. When I give money for what I have bought, I pay my debt. The transaction is complete. But I do not pay my debt when I give a check for the amount. I merely give an order to someone else to pay in my place. If he does not, I am still responsible in morals and in law. And as a matter of fact, no one will take a check of mine unless they trust or credit me. And though an honest face, good clothes, and a manifest exigency might enable me to pass a small check upon one who did not know me, without the guarantee of someone he did know, I could as readily, and perhaps more readily, get him to trust me outright. So I cannot, except to one who knows me or to whom I am identified as a man of good credit, pass the check of another, or his note or draft or bill of exchange in my favor, and without guaranteeing it by endorsement. Even if I do not make a payment, I merely turn over with my own guarantee an order for the payment. Thus, there is a quality attaching to money, in common apprehension, which clearly distinguishes it from all forms of credit. It is, so far as the giver of the money is concerned, a final closing of the transaction. For money is properly recognized by municipal law as the common medium of exchange. All such things as checks, drafts, notes, etc., though they largely dispense with and greatly economize the use of money, do so by utilizing credit. Credit as a facilitator of exchange is older than money, and perhaps is even now more important than money, though it may be made into money as gold may be made into money. But though it may be made into money, it is not in itself money, any more than gold of itself is money, and cannot, without confusion as to the nature and functions of money, be included as money. What then shall we say that money is? Evidently, the essential quality of money is not in its form or substance, but in its use. Its use is not that of being consumed, but of being continually exchanged. It participates in and facilitates other exchanges as a medium or flux, serving upon a larger scale the same purpose of keeping tally and facilitating transfers as is served by the chips or counters often used in games of chance. This use comes from a common or usual consent or disposition to take it in exchange, not as representing or promising anything else, but as completing the exchange. The only question anyone asks himself in taking money in exchange is whether he can, in the same way, pass it on in exchange. If there is no doubt of that, he will take it, for the use he has for money is to pass it on in exchange. If he has doubt of that, he will take it only at a discount proportion to the doubt, or not take it at all. What then makes anything money is the common consent or disposition to accept it as a common medium of exchange. If a thing has this essential quality in any place and time, it is money in that place and time, no matter what other quality it may lack. If a thing lacks this essential quality in any place and time, it is not money in that place and time, no matter what other quality it may have. To define money, whatever in any time and place is used as the common medium of exchange is money in that time and place. There is no universal money. While the use of money is almost as universal as the use of languages, and it everywhere follows general laws as does the use of languages, yet as we find language differing in time and place, so do we find money differing. In fact, as we shall see, money is in one of its functions a kind of language, the language of value. Chapter 3. Medium of Exchange and Measure of Value. The primary quality of money is in its use as the common medium of exchange, but proceeding from this use as a common medium of exchange, money has another and closely conjoined use, that of serving as a common measure of value. The reason for this is that the use of money as a common medium of exchange, which causes it to be esteemed for exchange and not for consumption, makes it, among all exchangeable things, that which in civilized society is most often and most commonly exchanged. A given portion of wood or coal, for instance, may be used by the producer and thus not be exchanged at all. Or it may be exchanged once or perhaps even half a dozen times between cutting or mining and its reaching the consumer. So it is with potatoes, wheat, or corn. The majority of horses are probably not exchanged at all during their working days, and it would be a horse that is much more likely to be exchanged that could have 6 owners during its life. Cotton, wool, hemp, and silk may pass from 1 to half a dozen exchanges before they assume the form of cloth or rope, and in that form pass through from 2 to half a dozen more exchanges before reaching the consumer. And so with lumber or iron, or most of the forms of paper, meat, or leather. Not only is the ultimate purpose of the exchanges of such things destructive consumption, but they are mainly composed of things that, if not soon consumed, would wear out or decay. Money, on the other hand, is not produced for the purpose of being consumed, but for the purpose of being exchanged. This, not consumption, is its use, and we seek for its substance materials least subject to wear and decay, while it is usually carefully guarded by whoever for the moment may possess it. And further, While an article of money may frequently pass through more hands in a single day than ordinary articles of wealth are likely to pass through during the whole of their existence, the use of money in thought and speech as a symbol of value brings it to the constant notice of those who do not often tangibly use it. Thus it is that the value of the money, the common medium of exchange in any community, becomes to the people of that community better known than the value of anything else, and hence is most readily and constantly chosen to compare the value of other things. But here may arise a question, which I wish thoroughly to answer. If, as explained previously, value is in itself a relation to labor, why can we not find not merely a common measure of value, but an exact and final measure of value in labor itself? This is a question that perplexes a great many of the monetary theories that have been broached in the United States. Yet in the light of our previous investigation, the reason why the real measure of value cannot serve as a common measure of value is clear. It lies in the human constitution. We become conscious of exertion through the toil and trouble it involves, the feeling of effort, and, at length, of irksomeness and repugnance that attends its continuance. Now, feeling is an affection or condition of the individual perception or ego, which can find objective manifestation only through action. Even a mother can know the feelings of her baby only through its actions. If she can tell that it is hungry or sleepy or in pain, or is satisfied and happy, it is only in this way. As we have seen, labor, in the sense of exertion, is the true, ultimate, and universal measure of value. What anything will bring in exchange is always based upon an estimate of the toil and trouble attendant upon the exertion which the possession of the thing will save. While exertion is always the real measure of value, to which all common measures of value must refer, yet to get a common measure of value, which will enable us to express from one to another both quantity and quality, duration and intensity of exertion, we must take some result of exertion, just as to find a common measure of heat, light, expansive force, or gravitation, we must take some tangible manifestation of those forms of energy. It is because commodities, being the results of exertion, are tangible manifestations of exertion that they are generally and naturally used as common measures of value. Even where exertion is expressed in time, there is always at least an implied reference to accomplishment or results. On going ashore in San Francisco, a shipmate of mine, who could not tell a scythe from a marlinspike, hired out to a farmer in haying time for $5 a day. At his first stroke with the scythe, he ran it so deep in the ground that he nearly broke it in getting it out. Though he indignantly denounced such antiquated tools as out of fashion, declaring that he was used to the patent scythes that turn up at the end, he did not really feel wronged that the farmer would not pay him a cent, as he knew that the agreement for a day's labor was really an agreement for so much mowing. In fact, the form of measuring exertion by time, at bottom, involves its measurement by result. In short, while exertion, including both quantity and intensity, is always the true and final measure of value, it is only through the manifestations of exertion that any common measure of value can be had. Thus, commodities, being tangible expressions of exertion, become the readiest common measures of value, and have since the beginning of human society been so used. While any commodity, or for that matter any definite service, may be used as a common measure of value, the tendency is always to use, for this purpose, the commodity whose value is most generally and easily recognized. And since the commodity which is used as the common medium of exchange becomes in that use the commodity which is oftenest exchanged and whose value is most generally and easily recognized, whatever serves as the common medium of exchange tends in that to become the common measure of value, in terms of which the values of other things are expressed and compared. In societies that have reached a certain stage of civilization, this is always money. Hence, we may define money with regard to its functions as that which at any time and place serves as the common medium of exchange and the common measure of value. It must be remembered, however, that of these two functions, use as the common medium of exchange is primary. That is to say, use as the common medium of exchange brings about use as the common measure of value, and not the reverse. But it is still evident, as Adam Smith said, that labor, in the sense of exertion, is the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities. The only universal, as well as the only accurate measure of value, or the only standard by which we can compare the values of all commodities in all times and in all places. For it is still true, as he said, that the real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. What everything is really worth to the man who has acquired it and wants to dispose of it or exchange it for something else is the toil and trouble which it can save to himself and which it can impose upon other people. Since labor is thus the real and universal measure of value, whatever any country may use as a common measure of value can impose little difficulty upon the exchanges of its people with the people of other countries using other common measures of value. Nor yet would any change within a country from one common measure of value to another common measure of value bring more than slight disturbance, were it not for the effect upon credits or obligations. In this lies the main source of the controversies and confusions with which the money question is now beset. Before going further, it would therefore be well, at least so far as pertains to the idea of money, to examine the relations of credit to exchange. Chapter 4. The Office of Credit in Exchanges. Imagine a number of shipwrecked men swimming ashore in their boats to an uninhabited island in a climate genial enough to enable them to support life. What would be their first exchanges? Would they not be based upon the various forms of the proposition, "I will do or get this for you, if you will do or get this for me"? Now, no matter where or how they got into this world, this must have been the position of the first men when they got here, and all that we can reason from with any certainty goes to show that these first men must have been essentially the same kind of men as we ourselves. If there is any difference in priority between them, credit must, in the nature of things, have preceded barter as an instrument of exchange, and must, at least from the very first, have assisted barter. What more natural than that the first man who had killed a deer or made a large catch of fish should be willing to give now, while he had abundance, in return for a promise that his neighbor would remember him in the same way when similarly fortunate? The organization of credit into more elaborate and finer forms goes on with the development of civilization, but credit must have begun to aid exchanges with the very beginning of human society, and it is in the backwoods and new settlements rather than in the great cities that we will today find its direct forms playing relatively the most important part in exchanges. In explaining the origin and use of money, Adam Smith much overrated the difficulties of barter, and in this he has been followed by nearly all the writers who have succeeded him. Of the condition before the use of metals as money, he says,
"One man, we shall suppose, has more of a certain commodity than he himself has occasion for, while another has less. The former consequently would be glad to dispose of, and the latter to purchase, a part of this superfluity. But if this latter should chance to have nothing that the former stands in need of, no exchange can be made between them. The butcher has more meat in his shop than he himself can consume, and a brewer and baker would each be willing to purchase part of it. But they have nothing to offer in exchange, except different productions of their respective trades, and the butcher is already provided with all the bread and beer which he has immediate occasion for. No exchange can, in this case, be made between them. He cannot be their merchant, nor they his customers, and they are all of them thus mutually less serviceable to one another.
Though this explanation of the difficulties attending barter has been paraphrased by writer after writer since Adam Smith, it is an exaggeration so gross as to be ridiculous. The differentiation of such trades as that of the butcher, brewer, and baker, the fact that men habitually devote their labor to the production of more of certain commodities than they themselves can consume, implies a division of labor that could not possibly take place, were exchange impossible under the circumstances that Adam Smith assumes. And it is evident that such circumstances would impose no insuperable difficulty to exchange, even though true money had not yet come into use. The butcher, with meat that he wanted to dispose of, would not have refused the exchange offered by the brewer and baker because he himself was already provided with all the bread and beer that he had immediate occasion for. On the contrary, he would say, "I have no immediate use for bread and beer, because I am already supplied, but I will give you the meat you want, on your promise to give me its equivalent in bread and beer when I call for them." Nor need he necessarily wait for his own supply of bread and beer to be exhausted before calling on the baker and brewer for the fulfillment of their promises. For since man's wants are not satisfied with meat, bread, and beer alone, he might want from the tailor a coat, from the grazier a bullock, from the carpenter a house. And since they cannot take from him at once full payment in such a perishable commodity as meat, he could help out his part of the exchange by telling the baker and brewer to give to them the bread and beer they had promised him. And that is to say, it is not necessary for an exchange that both sides of it shall be effected at once, or with the same person. One part or side of the full exchange may be effected at once, and the effecting of the other part or side may be deferred to a future time, and transferred to another person or persons by means of trust or credit. And by this simple and natural device, and without the intervention of money, salt could be exchanged for less quantities of beef or mutton than are likely to spoil before a single family could consume them. The truth is that the difficulties of barter, which Adam Smith speaks of here as if they were insurmountable, are always avoided by the use of trust where trust is possible. It is really in exchange between those who are unknown to each other and do not expect to meet each other again that money performs its most indispensable office. The use of money, by which the traveler can easily carry with him the means of supplying his needs, has greatly facilitated traveling. Yet in the bill of exchange, the letter of credit, Cook's coupons, and the book of certified checks, which are so largely displacing money for the use of travelers, we come back again to the use of trust. Trust or credit is indeed the first of all the instrumentalities that facilitate exchange. Its use antedates not merely the use of any true money, but must have been coeval with the first appearance of man. Truth, love, and sympathy are of human nature. It is not only that without them man could never have emerged from the savage state, but that without them he could not have maintained himself even in the savage state. If brought on earth without them, he would inevitably have been exterminated by his animal neighbors or have exterminated himself. And trust or credit is not merely the first of the agencies of exchange in the sense of priority. It yet is, as it always has been, the first in importance. In spite of our extensive use of money in effecting exchanges, what is accomplished by it is small compared with what is accomplished by credit. In international exchanges, money is not used at all, while the great volume of domestic exchange is in every civilized country carried on by the giving and cancellation of credits. As a matter of fact, the most important use of money today is not as a medium of exchange, though that is its primary use. It is that of a common measure of value, its secondary use. Not only this, but with the advance in civilization, the tendency is to make use of credit as money, to coin, as it were, trust into currency, and thus to bring into use a medium of exchange better adapted in many circumstances to easy transfer than metallic money. The paper money, so largely in use in all civilized countries, is in reality a coinage of credit or trust. Chapter 5. The Genesis of Money. Money is not an invention, but rather a natural growth or development, arising in the progress of civilization from common perceptions and common needs. The same fundamental law of human nature that prompts exchange, the law by which we seek to satisfy our desires with the least exertion, prompts us, with the growth of exchanges, to adopt as a medium for them the most labor-saving instruments available. All exchange is of services or commodities. But as commodities are, in reality, concrete services, they afford from the first the readiest media of exchange, performing that office and serving as measures of value not only for other commodities but for direct services. In primitive societies, or any outposts of civilization where better means were not readily obtainable, skins, shells, salt, beads, tobacco, tea, blankets, and many other commodities have been used as common media of exchange and common measures of value, thus becoming the money of the time and place. But the metals, and particularly the precious metals, so will fill all the requirements of a medium of exchange that wherever they have become well known, mankind has applied them to this use. At first they were doubtless weighed, and perhaps tested, with every passage from hand to hand. But as their use for purposes of exchange became more common, the desire to economize labor must soon have led to the running of the metals into pieces of definite weight and purity, so that they may be passed from hand to hand without trouble of weighing and testing them. To make these pieces of circular form, and to afford evidence that they yet retained their original substance by stamping their sides and edges, are obvious devices that seem to have been adopted wherever sufficient skill in the arts had been attained and the metals were in this way used. And thus, by a natural development in use, a commodity peculiarly adapted to the purpose becomes, in the shape of coined money, the commodity which serves as a medium of exchange and measure of value for all commodities and services. But while the first purpose of coinage is, we may safely assume, to save the trouble of weighing and testing the commodity which has become a common medium of exchange, the general use of these coins, as giving evidence of weight and purity, must gradually have the effect of transferring the quality of ready exchangeability from the commodity to the coin. The habit of weighing and testing passes away. Even the amount of the commodity embodied in the coin is, by the great majority of those who use it, forgotten or not heeded, and the shape, size, color, and devices on the coins become the things that give its circulation. An American eagle, or $10 piece, contains so many grains of gold of a certain fineness, and exchanges at the value of the gold. A man with a $10 gold piece will find no difficulty in the United States in fairly exchanging it for anything he may happen to want. But he would find much difficulty in fairly exchanging the same quantity of gold in the shape of dust or of an ingot, anywhere except with a bullion dealer. A curious evidence of this tendency to accept the sign rather than the substance is given in the history of the American trade dollar. For many years, much of the export of silver to China has been in the shape of Mexican dollars, the stamp of which has become known there as evidencing a certain weight of silver. Thinking that it might take the place in China of the Mexican coin, the American government in 1874 coined what was called a trade dollar. It was better finished and handsomer than the Mexican dollar, and contained a greater weight of silver. But the Chinese preferred a coin whose look they had become familiar with to one that was new to them, even though the latter was of greater intrinsic value. The attempt was a failure, and the coinage of the trade dollar was stopped. Now this transfer of ready exchangeability from the commodity to the coin with the accompanying relegation of the commodity itself to the same position in exchange held by other commodities, which takes place as a result of the use of coin money, is a matter of great importance, leading ultimately to a complete change in the nature of the money used. In the coinage of the precious metals, the use of commodities as a medium of exchange seems to have reached its highest form. But the very same qualities which of all commodities best fit the precious metals for this use attach or may attach in still higher degree to something which, having no material form, may be passed from person to person or place to place without inconvenience from bulk or weight, or danger of injury from accident, abrasion, or decay. This is a credit or an obligation. And as the advance of civilization goes on, the same tendency to seek the gratification of desire with the least exertion, which with a certain advance of civilization leads to the development of commodity money, leads with its further advance to the utilization of credit as money. Movement in this direction may be distinguished along three lines. 1. The admixture in coinage of obligation value with production value. 2. The use of obligation or credit as representing and economizing commodity money. 3. The use of pure credit money. We are here considering only money. Not only is credit a facilitator of exchange before money of any kind is developed, but the same social progress which shows itself in the development of money also shows itself in the extension of credit. If the use of money supersedes the use of credit in some exchanges, it is only where the use of credit is difficult and inconvenient, and in facilitating exchanges over wider areas than the use of the primitive forms of credit would have been equal to. It also increases that mutual knowledge and mutual desire to exchange that are necessary to the extension of credit. Although the primary and local function of money is that of affording a common medium of exchange, its secondary function of affording a common measure of value soon becomes more important, and the extension of credit in our modern civilization is far more striking and important than the extension in the use of money as a medium of exchange. Though the use of any particular money as a medium of exchange is still local, the money of any one country circulating only to a very limited extent in other countries, yet the development of credit has been such that the exchange of commodities to the ends of the earth and among peoples using different monies is conducted by means of it. But what we are considering now is not this development of commercial credits, but the way in which the use of commodity money passes into the use of credit money. Or, in other words, the way in which the coinage of production value into a convenient medium of exchange passes into the coinage of obligation values. The demand for any metal in exchange is, at first, like the demand for other things in exchange, a demand for consumption, and its value or rate of exchange is determined by the cost of producing it in merchantable form. As one or another of the metals began to come into use as a medium of exchange, the largest demand for it would doubtless for some time still be for consumption, and thus the value of the metal used as money would at first be no greater than that of the same metal intended for consumption. But when coinage fairly began, something more of labor would be required to produce the stamped and finished coin than to produce the mere ingot of merchantable shape. Hence, there are, or may be, two elements in the exchange value of a metal coin. 1. The intrinsic value, or value of the metal itself, which is governed by the cost of producing it in merchantable form. And 2. The cost of changing it from that form into the form of a finished coin. This second element, the charge for coinage, is called seigneurage, from the idea that the coining of money has from the earliest times been deemed a function of the sovereign, the seigneur or lord, as representative of organized society or the state. Now the conversion of metal into coin seems always to have been paid for in the same way as the conversion of grain into meal or flour, by a toll or deduction in the return. This toll or seigneurage may be less or more than the actual cost of coinage. It is what the lord or state, who has the sole privilege of coinage, chooses to take for it. The difference between the rate at which metal is received or bought at the mint and the rate at which it is returned or issued in coin. Had the coinage of metal into money been left to the free competition of individual enterprise, the charge for this conversion would have tended to the lowest point at which coin could be produced in sufficient quantities to supply the demand. But so far as we can see, this has never been the case. The primary object of coinage being the certification of weight and fineness, that is obviously best assured by the stamp of the highest and most widely known authority, that of the sovereign or state. Where coinage is thus monopolized in the hands of the sovereign, the element of seigniorage in the value of coin may be eliminated altogether by the agreement or practice of the sovereign to return in coin the full amount of metal brought to his mint, as is today the case in some countries with some metals, or it may be extended so as to become the most important of the two elements in the value of coin by the refusal of the sovereign to coin on other terms and the exclusion or refusal of other coinage. Indeed, by the selection of some very cheap commodity for the material of coinage, it may become practically the only element of value. For, as Ricardo pointed out, the whole exchange value of paper money may be considered as a charge for seigniorage. The reason for this fact is that, since the issuance of money is a monopoly, the element of intrinsic value may be partially or entirely eliminated without loss of usefulness, and this is to be found in the peculiar use of money. The use of other commodities is in consumption. The use of money is in exchange. Thus, the intrinsic character of money is of no moment to him who receives it to circulate again. The only question that he is concerned with is as to the readiness of others to receive it from him when he wants, in his turn, to pass it on. And this readiness, where coin money comes into use as a common medium of exchange, is associated with coinage, which becomes the badge or stamp of circulation. Now, the first coined money being commodity money, the demand for it would be, for a long time, in part at least, a demand for consumption. In the simpler stage of the arts, coins would be much more frequently than now beaten or melted into plates, adornments, ornaments, etc. And, more important still, perhaps, it would continue to be used as a commodity in exchange with other countries. It is probable that the coinage of the more important sovereigns had a far wider area of diffusion when international commerce was much less than it is now. For, although the area of commerce was more limited than now, there was proportionately more of the area without any coinage of its own. And before the widespread development of credit as a medium of international exchanges, the use of coin in them as a conveniently portable commodity was probably greater than now. Now, the demand for coin sent abroad, as American gold sent to England, like the demand for coin for use in the arts, is a demand for use in consumption, and would quickly show itself in a lessening of the aggregate demand and consequently of value. Upon a reduction of the commodity value of coin, no matter how strictly the workmen of the mints were sworn to secrecy, as was the device of sovereigns who contemplated deteriorating their coinage. But still more important is the fact that in order to keep up the value of the coin while diminishing its intrinsic value, it is necessary that the supply be strictly limited. But the sovereigns, whether princes or republics, who have resorted to the expedient of debasing their coinage, have generally done so for the purpose of turning the same amount of metal into more coin, rather than that of keeping the same amount of coin in circulation with the use of less metal, or have been unable to resist the temptation to do this when they found opportunity. Thus, to the ministers and advisers of the sovereigns, who seem everywhere to have assumed from the first exclusive privilege of coining, it must have seemed an easy and safe economy to reduce the cost of the coin by substituting for its material some part of cheaper metal. Hence came those numerous and repeated reductions in the value of coins, which are a marked feature in all monetary history. which have reduced the English pound sterling to but a fraction of its original equivalence to a pound troy, and in other countries have brought about a still greater difference. So far as the principal and most important coinage is concerned, these attempts have from time to time ended in disaster, and in the final reunion of circulating value with commodity value, either by the rejection and withdrawal of the debased coin and a recoinage, or more frequently by the lowering of the circulating value to the level of the commodity value. This, however, is not a necessary result of the debasement of coinage, as is so often assumed. A less valuable metal may be substituted in a coin for a more valuable metal without lessening the circulating value, provided, and this is the essential condition, it continues to be as hard for those who use the coin in exchanges to get the one as it was to get the other. Or, in other words, that it continues to represent the same exertion. For all exchange is really the exchange of labor, and the rate at which all things tend to exchange for all other things is determined by the relative difficulty of obtaining them. That a $5 note of the government of the United States, having no intrinsic value, 5 silver dollars, having an intrinsic value of something like $2.50, and a $5 gold piece, having an intrinsic value of $5, will exchange in this country for each other, or for the same amount of commodities or services, is because the difficulty of getting these things, the quantity and quality of exertion ordinarily required to obtain them, is precisely the same. Should it become in the slightest degree harder to get one of these things than the other, and this will show itself in a change of the rate at which they exchange. In this case, we say that the one commands a premium or that the others bear a discount. What gives the paper notes or coins of small intrinsic value the same exchange value as the gold coin is that the government concerned, which has a monopoly of coinage in its respective country, will not issue one of them on any less terms than it does the other, thus making them all to the individual equally hard to get. Chapter 6. The two kinds of money. While value is always one and the same power, that of commanding labor in exchange, there are, as we have seen, two different kinds of value: that which proceeds from production and that which proceeds from obligation. Now, money is peculiarly the representative of value, the common medium or flux through which things are exchanged with reference to their value, and the common measure of value. And corresponding to and proceeding from this distinction between the two kinds of value, there are, we find, two kinds of money in use in the more highly civilized world today. The one which we may call commodity money, originating in the value proceeding from production, and the other, which we may call credit money, originating in the value proceeding from obligation. This distinction has, of course, no relation to differences in denomination, such as those between English pounds, French francs, and American dollars. These are but differences of nomenclature. Nor yet does it coincide with differences in the material used as money, as, for instance, that between metal money and paper money. While all paper money is credit money, not all metal money is commodity money. What I understand by commodity money is money that exchanges at its value as a commodity, that is to say, which passes current at no more than its intrinsic value, or value of the material of which it is composed. Credit money is money that exchanges at a greater value than that of the material of which it is composed. In the one case, the whole value for which the money exchanges is the value it would have as a commodity. In the other case, the value for which the money exchanges is greater than its commodity value, and hence some part at least of its exchange value, as money is given to it by credit or trust. For instance, a man who exchanges $10 worth of wheat for a coin containing $10 worth of gold makes, in reality, a barter. He exchanges one commodity for an equal value of another commodity, crediting or trusting nobody. But having in the coin, he has received a commodity which, irrespective of its use as money, has an equal value to that which he gave. But the man who exchanges $10 worth of wheat for a $10 note receives for a commodity worth $10. What, as a commodity, has only the value of a bit of paper. What renders him willing to take it as an equivalent of the wheat is the faith, credit, or trust that he can, in turn, exchange it as money at the same valuation. If he drops the coin into the sea, he loses value to the extent of $10, and the sum of wealth is lessened by that amount. If he burns the paper note, he suffers loss to the value of $10, but he alone, the sum of wealth is not decreased. Paper money is in truth of the same nature as the check or order on an individual or corporation, except, and in this lies the difference that makes it money, that it has a wider and readier credit. The value of a coin of full intrinsic value, like the value of the wheat, is a value that comes from production. But the value of the paper money is, like the value of the check or order, a value from obligation. The first money in use was doubtless a commodity money, and there are some countries where it is still the principal money, and places, perhaps, where it is the only money. But in the more highly civilized countries, it has been superseded by credit money. In the United States, for instance, the only commodity or intrinsic value money now in circulation is the gold coinage of the United States. Our other coins have an intrinsic or commodity value that is far less. That they circulate at the same value as the gold coins shows that their exchange value has no reference to their intrinsic value. They are, in reality, as much credit money as is the greenback, the difference being that the stamp, which evidences their credit and thus secures their circulation, is impressed not on paper, but on a metallic material. The substitution of what is now the cheapest of metals, steel, or the utter elimination of intrinsic value, would not in the slightest lessen their circulating value. Now, as soon as the great labor-saving invention of money supplants barter, it is readily perceived that to leave it to everyone who chose to do so to issue money would be to entail general inconvenience and loss, to offer many temptations to roguery, and to put the poorer classes of society at a great disadvantage. These obvious considerations have led, everywhere society became well organized, to the recognition of the coinage of money as an exclusive function of government. The evils entailed by wildcat banking in the United States are too well remembered to need reference. The loss and inconvenience, the swindling and corruption that flowed from the assumption by each state of the Union of the power to license banks of issue, ended with the war, and no one would now go back to them. I think it may be accepted as a principle proved by experience that any considerable interest having necessary relations with government is more corruptive of government when acting upon government from without than when assumed by government. It is evidently the business of government to issue money. Yet instead of doing what every public consideration impels them to, and assuming wholly and fully as the exclusive function of the general government the power to issue paper money, the private interests of bankers have compelled the people of the untied states to the use of a hybrid currency, of which a large part, though guaranteed by the government, is issued and made profitable to corporations. The legitimate business of banking, the safekeeping and loaning of money, and the making and exchange of credits is properly left to individuals and associations. But by leaving to them, even in part and under restrictions and guarantees, the issuance of money, the people of the United States suffer an increase in the influences which exert a corrupting effect upon their government.
This has been The Science of Political Economy by Henry George, abridged by Lindy Davies, narrated via ElevenLabs AI, and of course, produced by a fellow freelance philosopher at youtube.com. We sincerely hope you've enjoyed this program.